you. Probably let's before we start, let's arrange, right? Уважаемые коллеги, dear ladies and gentlemen, let's start our workshop. Для вступительного слова, да, значит, открывает мероприятие, да, проректор по международному сотрудничеству Российского университета дружбы народов Ефремова Лариса Ивановна. Лариса Ивановна, пожалуйста.
Спасибо, Денис Андреевич. Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Мы с вами проводим международный семинар, и пандемия дала возможность находиться каждому для сегодняшней и политики, и научной, и образовательной деятельности вопросы. Мы сейчас с моими коллегами находимся в Турции, ведем переговорный процесс с ведущими университетами Турции, посещаем колледжи с тем, чтобы привлечь внимание ребят для обучения в Российском университете дружбы народов. Наверное, поддержки нашего университета и университета-инициатора, потому что в университете обучаются ребята из 162 стран мира. И мы те проблемы, которые существуют в государствах наших студентов. Это и межэтнические, межрелигиозные проблемы, и миротворческая деятельность сталкивается с рядом проблем, таких как затяжные конфликты, все более опасные условия, рост числа жертв среди миротворцев и многие другие проблемы. Объединить международных, отечественных ученых, исследователей и практиков для обмена опытом, идеями и новыми результатами научных исследований по проблемам миротворчества. Я недавно была в Пакистане, и мы видим, как сегодня развивается ситуация в Пакистане. Тоже идут волнения, идет смена власти, и в том числе задействованы и внутренние региональные конфликты в самом Пакистане. Мы буквально недавно были в Шри-Ланке, тоже видим, какой сейчас период переживает данная страна и граждане этой страны. У нас в конце прошлого года приехали обучаться студенты из Мьянмы. Это очень замечательно, хорошо, и ученые страны присутствуют сегодня на конференции, поэтому я вам, именно специалистам в этой области, желаю плодотворного творческого семинара, и я надеюсь, что вы совместно...
I hope that by joint decisions you'll find certain recommendations and moments tied to peacekeeping activities. Big thanks to all the participants. I wish you all good luck and great health. Big thanks to you, Larissa Ivanovna. Big thanks, colleagues. Let's...
Отставание от графика, да, мы немножечко вперед по графику пойдем. Вот. Я тогда, наверное, представлю основные моменты, связанные с именно с нашим семинаром, да, с предысторией и так далее, да, и вот Никита Сергеевич тоже, коллеги.
Никита Сергеевич, my dear colleagues, they tell our colleagues from Myanmar said that there is no translation, and how well does it works.
Could you hear translation? Right? Is it okay with translation?
Now it should be working.
Хорошо. Значит, ну, речь...
And what are we talking about? This is our fifth academic workshop on peacekeeping in the countries of the Global South. This project we are doing for the second year at our university. It's a workshop that's been held on a regular basis, and I think that by the end of this year we'll reach some final resolutions. Conditionally, the approaches to peacekeeping that we're developing, that we're researching, once again, it's peacekeeping in the countries of the Global South, and we can outline them as the concept of non-Western peacekeeping. If we use less strong terms, then it's post-Western peacekeeping, peacekeeping of the post-Western world. We are taking a critical outlook on the system that has been established up to the current moment. We've conducted last year 4 seminars. One was dedicated to peacekeeping in general, to different concepts, and it happened last year, so leading international experts and academics participated. We had many scientists from US, Canada, and Europe. After this, we've been working on the issues and problems of peacekeeping in Africa, specifically in the Western Africa. We had sessions with participation of the former Prime Minister of Mali, counselor to the chair of the Parliament of Cote d'Ivoire. We've also had a seminar on the African Horn countries with the participation of Russian and foreign researchers and academics. Also, we've had deputy head of some of the peacekeeping operation in Somalia. It was deputy head of this mission who participated. And third African seminar was dedicated to the problematic of the Great African Lakes. That also saw the participation of many scientists, academics, and practitioners. And now I see that I'm really glad that we have colleagues from the region, researchers from various countries, also have practitioners here. You know, in the second part, for the second session, we'll have people from the practical field speaking. I think that as the result of today's seminar, we'll have a more or less refined understanding on the specifics of peacekeeping, and I'll also underline peace building, because for the region of for the South Eastern Asian region, we think that peace building is even more relevant of a problematic. So let us start. Let us start a bit earlier than scheduled, but I think that it gives us the opportunity to speak more. So I'll switch to English. I'll moderate first session. I'll be the moderator.
Session. I would like to tell that you could speak a little bit more than 15 minutes, probably like 20 minutes, right? And we will discuss peacekeeping and peace building in two countries of Southeast Asia. We will speak about Philippines, right? And we will speak about Myanmar a lot. We will start by Philippines and we will finish by Philippines, right? But between two Philippines, right, we will have 3 reports on Myanmar. So I would like to present our first speaker from Philippines. But he will tell us about the situation not only in his country, but in the whole region. Is Professor Julkipli Wadi. He is a dean in the Institute of Islamic Studies, University of Philippines, Diliman. Dear Professor Wadi, welcome. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much.
Professor Wadi, excuse me, should I enable your presentation or you'll do it by yourself?
I think it would be better if you can show the PowerPoint that I sent you earlier.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Professor Wadi, you have more than 15 minutes once again, right? Up to 20 minutes, right? You're welcome. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Dicterev. Now, first of all, I'd like to thank the RUDN University for organizing this webinar. It is my first time to participate in a Russian initiated forum. I'm very glad, even more when I was given this invitation with the topic on dilemmas of contemporary peacekeeping, ASEAN, Russia, global conflict prevention, and best practices. Now, what I will do is provide a big or a major characterization of peace conditions in Southeast Asia. Then from there, I will move to the discussions on the case of the Philippines, particularly the Southern Philippines. So I hope my presentation would be able to clarify the themes of this program. First of all, Southeast Asia is a diverse region with rich history and culture. Its history dated back to almost a millennia, almost into that unrecorded part of history. And Southeast Asia has been subjected to different cultural and civilizational influences, mainly from Asiatic or Eastern civilization and later Western civilization. Southeast Asia also has extensive colonial experiences. It's because for many centuries, Southeast Asia has been the object of colonial penetration, mainly from the West. As a result, there developed relentless anti-colonial struggles amongst different peoples in Southeast Asia. Now, because of the global influence of nation states or the nation state system, most South Asia, the region of Southeast Asia, was divided or subdivided into different countries, as we know. And quite recently, many of these countries form regional organization, particularly the ASEAN or the Association of Southeast Asian Nation. For centuries also, they developed different cultural traditions in many parts of Southeast Asia, but at the same time, it also breed such multicultural tradition, breed some kind of a dynamic of state-society relation. By state, we refer to organized institutions like government. By society, we refer to mostly communities, and to some extent, there develop tensions between state and society, tensions that manifest in different forms. And one of these is ethnic tensions, and also it affected majority-minority relations or setup amongst countries, and also develop problems of different kinds, including cross-border problems, claims and counterclaims of certain territories, even class struggle, mainly advanced by ideological groups, and also liberation movements, mainly advanced by groups struggling for self-determination. And quite recently, Southeast Asia also evolved distinct form of radicalism, mainly from Muslim organizations, which the West referred to mostly as terrorism. In other words, Southeast Asia for the past several centuries or decades had been faced with what I call fluidity between the need to establish political stability in the respective countries, but at the same time, the same countries also is affected with what is called as fragility, or sometimes political science specialists would refer to states with high fragility problems as fragile states. So this is a rather general characterizations of Southeast Asia. Then I'd like to focus on highlighting the index or certain measurement of so-called fragile states. This is the subject of the second slide. Now, it's quite interesting that two countries which are actually to be discussed today, Myanmar and the Philippines, are have strong points as far as fragility is concerned. Now, Timor-Leste, Cambodia, Thailand, and to some extent Indonesia also shared the same degree of fragility, mainly because there are strong security threats in these countries. So in other words, I will focus on the issue of security threats that has made these countries, particularly Myanmar and the Philippines, although I will focus on the Philippines, as I think a colleague will be discussing the case of Myanmar. So I will focus on the Philippines. Now, the Philippines has two parts as far as security concern, sources of security concern is concerned. Is about there is a communist insurgency on one side that is growing in the north and to some extent even central Philippines and partly also southern Philippines. And there is also in southern Philippines what is referred to as the Moro struggle. This is the Philippine Muslims who had been struggling for self-determination this past several years. So, the next slide, please. Now, I will concentrate the discussions on the backdrop or background of the Moro struggle or the Philippine Muslim struggles originally, which has a very strong historical and political undertone, and it underwent from struggle for independence to autonomy. And there were a lot of liberation movements in the 60s and the 70s onward that were formed. Mainly what we call the Moro National Liberation Front, a group that is struggling for the liberations of Moro land. And later it was factionalized with the formations of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. At any rate, these troop fronts struggled originally for independence and now they're struggling for autonomy. Now later on, there arose radical movements, namely likes of the Abu Sayyaf group, the Mauti group, the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters, and others. But at any rate, there had been what I call a protracted peace process. The peace process had been going on since the 1970s, and it's continued until even the last few years. And also there were a number of peace agreements signed between the Philippine government and the Moro fronts. As a result, there were autonomous government organized or institutionalized and were expanded subsequently. The autonomous government, these autonomous governments is based in Muslim Mindanao, in the Bangsamoro area. But while this process is going on, there, however, grew the what I call the radical movements. So serving as the new security threats particularly in the southern Philippines. Now, the idea of peace settlement, in the next slide, please, and peacekeeping comes into play when there involved third parties. In the case of the earlier peace process in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the Organization of Islamic Conference or Cooperation had been involved in settling the Bangsamoro question. As you know, the Organization of Islamic Conference is the largest organization of the Muslim world. It's composed of more than 50 countries and other organization members of the Organization of Islamic Conference. Now, to say the least, the OIC had used the mode of peaceful settlement, for instance, like inquiry, good offices, including mediation. And to some extent, attempts for reconciliation, but not arbitration in the imposition of sanction. The main involvement of the OIC was mediation, but it was active. The OIC was active in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, but it was reduced in subsequent years. Now, the idea of peacekeeping or peacekeeping comes into play when for instance, the MILF, the latest Moro France, developed what I call local peacekeeping. That is in an attempt to address the polarization between the armed forces of the Philippines and the armed forces of the MILF, so that there will be the tensions or the war will be reduced. Then local peacekeeping groups were organized. This went on since the 90s until by early 2000. Then there was a big break when Malaysia brokered what is known as the Government of the Philippines MILF peace talks. So this was a breakthrough as far as the peace process of the government with the Moro France is concerned. The involvement of Malaysia in the conflict. Next slide, please. Now, more particularly, when Malaysia was involved, then the entity called International Monitoring Team was organized. This is a team headed by Malaysia, and it was later on added with such countries like Brunei, Indonesia, and other countries like Turkey, and few others. The role of the IMT is to monitor the implementations of the agreement on peace between the government of the Philippines and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front in 2001. That was based on the agreement signed between the MILF and the Philippine government in Tripoli, Libya. And it also has a role in terms of implementing the guidelines on the security aspects and implementations of the guidelines of humanitarian rehabilitation and development aspects of the agreement. Now note that the third party here are group of countries like Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, and few others. And they serve as a group in terms of reducing the possibilities of encounters, including war. Although the MIT could not actually stop the war when both parties, that is the military of the Philippines, would engage against the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. There are times, for instance, in early 2000, when the talks backed down, particularly what is known as the Memorandum of Agreement on ancestral domain between the Philippine government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, there was a big war. And the MIT or the IMT was there in Mindanao, but it could not do anything to stop the war. I well remember when the group had to simply leave Mindanao and return to the respective countries. So in a sense, there is a limit of the international monitoring team when the conflict between parties becomes intense. It only took quite several months when the IMT returned and began to pacify again the conflict and facilitate the conversation between the Philippine government and the War of France. In other words, the strength of an international monitoring team that functions like a peacekeeping, that has a peacekeeping function role, is that it somehow reduces, it could somehow reduce conflict, including the possibilities of encounters in war between parties. But when war erupts quite strongly, it has certain limitations. It has to depend on the willingness of both parties to come again, and they have to wait for if they will be made part again in the peace process. So as far as the Philippine Muslim experience is concerned, so far the role of the Organization of Islamic Conference and the role of the International Monitoring Team are classic examples of engagement as far as Pacific settlement or peace settlement, but including maintaining a certain element or number of peacekeeping force. But it is not similar to, say, forces from other countries, say, that are sent to Syria, to maintain the peace, or say some countries with their armies as peacekeeping force under the United Nations, say, sent to the Golan Heights or other countries. It's of a different kind. The role of IMT is to support the peace process, and somehow, because of the success of the peace process between the Philippine government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, somehow we could say that the role of IMT was positive. It was able to elicit the success of the peace talks, and including the signing of peace agreements and the signing of new legislations for peace in Mindanao, including the broadening or the expansion of the autonomous region in Mindanao, now called as the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao. So that is the role of the OIC and the IMT that has some element of peacekeeping functions. Now, my last slide, because the time is limited, I want to highlight some theoretical questions. Whether autonomy can serve as instrument of political stability and decrease states' fragility. As far as this question is concerned, we say yes. Autonomy can serve as instrument of political stability because the threats coming from rebel groups are being transformed into opportunity in terms of the fact that the rebel groups would now play part in the running of the autonomous government. So the threat is removed and they will become the new player in running the autonomous government. And to some extent, it has certain function in reducing states' fragility. So we say that autonomy has certain functions in maintaining political stability. Now, the next question, how does state-society relation impact in the institutionalization of autonomy? Now, to some extent, the autonomous region would be mediating both state and society. That is, the functions of state from the central government would now be coursed through in some crucial aspects through the autonomous government. And the autonomous government would now run their own society, like the Muslim areas. The problem is sometimes there are rebels, remaining rebels and other radicals who could not accept the new arrangement. So they would rebel against and continue to wage war and even radicalism, not only against the government, but even against that entity. So in other words, while certain aspects of rebels are integrated into mainstream society, another groups would become threat to the government. So in other words, autonomy has its own limitation. That is why the question number 3, why is autonomous setup of government unstable? We say because the autonomous government has to balance both the interest of the national government and the interest of the minority. Now, if the autonomous government will become so close, and will be controlled by the national government, there will be aspects, there will be groups in the community that would rise and oppose, especially if they don't believe in the autonomous government. It is because such group would like to advance what they call as the struggle for their identity and their struggle for self-determination. So there is a limit or inadequacy of autonomous setup of government to be able to stabilize the relationship between the national government and the regional or local government. Now, when does peacekeeping become relevant? I think ordinarily our idea of peacekeeping is that, or particularly the sending of peacekeeping force, is that they only come when a conflict has happened and there is a need to serve as a referee in a conflict. But I think we have to deconstruct our understanding of peacekeeping, because in the context of Mindanao experience, I think there has to be continuous monitoring, not only of the peace process, but even in the conduct of the autonomous region, especially monitoring in terms of the understanding the continuing threat in the area, so that so I say third parties would know very well the condition of that area, and that when situation gets worse, then there is a proper way of engaging in re-engaging peace, and even maintaining certain say monitoring groups or peacekeeping force in such area. So in other words, my contention is that peacekeeping is relevant, is continuously relevant, even in area where there is already peace process, and where there is already peace agreement, and where there is already some relative autonomy extended by the national government to the minority, like the Muslims in the Philippines. So this is my discussion as far as that one part of threat group in the Philippines is concerned, and how they impact not only in country like the Philippines, but even in other part of Southeast Asia. So I think that would end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Wadi, for such an extensive presentation. From one side, you gave us the experience of Philippines, but you also touched some typical problems of peace building process, the problem of inclusivity, the problem of autonomy, etc. And I guess that the questions raised by you are relevant for other countries of the region. dear colleagues, don't hesitate to ask your questions. You could raise your hand, or you could write them in chat, both in Russian or in English. Welcome, right? Don't hesitate to ask your questions. And you could also ask your questions in chat even during the intervention, please. Meanwhile, I would ask my question, right, to Professor Wadi. I specialize in quantitative methods of analysis, and your second slide was about some scores, right? Scores of fragility. You personally, do you agree with these scores, right? Whether they are relevant, whether they show a relevant picture of, I would say, a picture of fragility, instability in the region, according to you?
Yeah.
Probably I would ask Nikita to demonstrate us once again, right, the second slide, right, with this scores, right?
Yeah, that slide is simply intended to provide as you said, a quantitative measure in terms of establishing what is known as the fragility index of countries in Southeast Asia. I think I take this data from Fragile States, website. They had been following, the discussions or providing analytical and quantitative measurement in terms of establishing the degree of fragility among countries. So I just focus in identifying those in Southeast Asia, particularly amongst ASEAN. Now, I notice in the variables identified by the fragility in the fragility index, it gives security threat as a strong component in identifying its impact on certain country, making it fragile in their language. It is just my way of trying to simplify the conditions of peace in general, including the relative standing of these countries in terms of the while comparing them by looking at the degree of security threats. Now, I was not even aware that Myanmar will be part of our discussion today. So it was not my intention, in fact, to sort of provide a kind of a basis as to why Myanmar and the Philippines were at the forefront in today's webinar. It just quite coincidental that because both Myanmar and the Philippines are facing security threats in relatively similar forms, although with certain distinctions. So somehow, this index would give us certain hint. But whether or not they would explain everything, no. We really have to look at the nuances of each country. In the case of Myanmar, the Philippines, Cambodia, Thailand, and Indonesia, in understanding the characteristics of security threats. So your question, Professor Digterev, whether it is enough or reliable, if I may, I think that can help. This kind of statistics would be able to help. But we should not stop on this. We should also look at other indices as a guide in our analysis so that we could properly understand the peace condition in Southeast Asia, particularly in among countries in the region. So it is just my way to be able to present a kind of a simplistic overview of what I call peace conditions in the region, and somehow this study of the fragile states give us certain hint of the conditions of peace in countries like Myanmar, the Philippines, and others. As to the details of the how, for instance, the fragile states is being done, I think that is of another area in terms of the questions of methodology and so on and so forth. I think I would not go into that part of discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. No, I would probably say just a few words about these indicators, right? I entirely agree with you that it helps in some way, right? It shows some picture, right? But of course, I guess we should take care about methodological vulnerability, right? Of such indicators, right? How they are constructed, etc. And when I speak about, you know, post-Western or non-Western concepts of peacekeeping, right? We are working on. I would say it's a very important element of these concepts because we need, of course, we need key performance indicators, right? When we make peace building process, we should measure whether it is efficient or no. How we could measure it, right? That is a very huge problem, right? For example, you know that, for example, after Afghanistan and Iraq, right? We understand that, for example, in Afghanistan and Iraq, they promoted democracy, etc. Right? They oriented to some indexes of peace, indexes of freedom, etc. But it's really not relevant. You know, in Russia, around probably 15 years ago, some scholars, they introduced a political atlas of modernity, atlas of modernity, right? And one of the criteria was about strong state, right? And one of the indicators of strong state for them was, for example, that you don't have foreign military bases on your territory, for example, right? Like an indicator of strong state, etc. Right? So I probably invite my colleagues, right, the next presenters for some intellectual discussion, right? What should be those key performance indicators, right, that will help us to really measure the effectiveness of peace building efforts. Is not, I would say, is not a trivial question, right? It's not an easy to answer it. Okay, any more questions to our colleague from Philippines, please? Okay, if you don't have any more questions, we go to Myanmar case, right? And it's with a pleasure. I would like to present my colleague, Dr. Naing Svea Oo, who is a founder and executive director at Thai Ninga Institute for Strategic Studies. I know that this institute published a very strong journal, right? And by the way, I always would like to ask you, right? Thai Ninga Institute of Strategic Studies and Myanmar Institute, is it a synonym, or these are two different institutes? Or please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, sir. It is my honor to participate in this workshop. It is nice to meet you again, the professors. So My institute is an independent institute. Teniga means the strategy. Yeah. So it is a Sanskrit word. Yeah. So also thank you very much, Iridian University, for inviting me. So I used to be a postgraduate medical student in Moscow State University more than 10 years ago. Yeah, but my Russian is not so good, so I would like to present in English. So I'd like to share my presentation. Yes. Today, I would like to discuss about the peace building in Myanmar's views. So for connecting with the developing country and peace building, peace is a prerequisite for the development as a whole because it creates an enabling environment for the fundamentals of the society's progress, such as the human capital formation, infrastructure development, market subject to the rules of law, and so on. So it is very important for the peace building in the developing countries, such as Myanmar. So peace building includes activities such as the social healing, promoting dialogue and reconciliation, monitoring human rights violation, and promotion of participatory government. So Myanmar is a multi-ethnic country with a long history of and conflicts between Myanmar and forces in Myanmar. It is called Tamador, and different ethnic organizations, which we in short EAOs. Myanmar has been experiencing the ethnic conflicts for more than 70 years since after its independence in 1948. The peace process currently underway in Myanmar represents the best opportunity in the half century to resolve the ethnic conflicts in our country. However, the political, social, and economic issue at the heart of the conflict will not be easily resolved. So Myanmar is a country with one of the world's longest running civil conflicts. Myanmar's successive government have been trying to end these decades-long conflicts, and the current peace process play a crucial role in the country's development. However, Myanmar peace process is moving forward very slowly with little progression. For instance, only 10 out of 80 government-recognized ethnic organizations have signed the nationwide ceasefire agreement thus far. It's appears then the peace process is blocked over some issues, and it is necessary to identify the problem first before seeking the solution. So this is the EU along which were distributed along in our country. Our country is not as big as the Russia, but there are a lot of major organizations in our country. So there are two major groups. The first one is the nationwide ceasefire agreement signatory. There are the 10 ethnic organization there, and also the alliance called FPNCC, which is the Federal Political Negotiation and Consultative Committee, formed with the 6 organization. These are non-signatory of the nationwide ceasefire agreement. So for the peace meeting in Myanmar, on the August 2011, the president formally offered.
В 2011 году президент Ю Тайн Сайн подписал соглашение и запустил диалог мира между 2011 годом и 2014
EUs were signed. This NCA then the nationwide ceasefire agreement was signed by the government and 8 EU on 50 October 2015. And also 2 more organizations signed the NCA in 2018. So the lower part of the 10 group are the signatory of the nationwide ceasefire agreement. So there are at least 10 organizations remain signed to the NCA. So nationwide ceasefire agreement between the government and the ethnic organization recognize, reinforce, and reaffirms all previous agreements between the government and the ethnic organization. So this agreement also aims to secure an enduring peace based on the principle of the dignity and justice through an inclusive political dialogue process involving all relevant stakeholders in order to achieve a lasting and sustainable peace in this country. So the signatory to nationwide ceasefire agreement pledged to each other to diligently work together to implement all provisions contained in this agreement completely, successfully, and without fail in an accountable, responsible, and transparent manner. The NCA is not only a ceasefire agreement, but also a framework under which the current formal peace process has been driven. The goal of the NCA is to end decade of violence between ethnic armed groups and the Myanmar armed forces, and to pave the way for political dialogue that will eventually lead to peace and reconciliation. In accordance with this, the Union Peace Conference, UPC, also known as the 21st Century Panel, has been held 4 times now. In January, the text mentioned ending armed conflicts, holding a political dialogue, and finding political solution by forming a democratic federal union. The Union Peace Conference aims to unite all the ethnic nationality and find solution in order to be a democratic federal union through their dialogues. The 4 rounds of this UPC have been so far resulted in agreement on a total of 51 principles covering political, economic issues, as well as social and land rights. However, the key political and security concerns has equality, self-determination, and non-secession from the Union. There are some obstacles to achieve building the peace. According to the analysis, there are some obstacles to achieving peace in Myanmar. Which one of them, the most important one, is the persuading all the ethnic armed groups to sign the nationwide ceasefire agreement. And also, most of the stronger armed groups are stay on non-security, and also armed clashes continue in many ethnic regions. Moreover, even though the non-security EOs were allowed to attend the session of the 21st century peace conferences as observer, they were not allowed to participate in a talk and decision making. Since the inclusive participation of all ethnic armed groups is vital for a successful peace process, the bringing of the non-security group to the formal peace negotiation table remain great challenges for the governments. Another one is that to achieving peace is the issue of the establishing a national army, following by the principle of non-secession and the right to self-determination for the ethnic minority group that made a package G. In principle, EU accept the idea of the single army, but its structures and responsibility need to be discussed before the full agreement. The issue of non-secession proposed by the armed forces and related to the self-determination also remain unresolved. So another one is that the war economy behind the ethnic armed organization. Each ethnic armed organization has their own ideas and their interests. They get a benefit from the selling jade and tea to the neighboring country, especially to the Chinas. And some strong EU has their own weapon factory, and they produce small and ammunition. And they also sell these weapons and ammunition to other small EU and terrorist groups. So they are enjoying their war economy. It's very hard to give up their weapons. So in last year, the security forces captured a lot of weapons and ammunition near the Mandalay, which is the middle part of the country. And these also the terrorists were captured. These weapons and ammunition were made from the ethnic organization called Kachin Independent Organization and Army, which is in another part of the country. So these large ethnic organization sold this ammunition to the recently formed People Defense Forces, the terrorist groups, after the February 1st incidents. So the important role is the Tamro's role in the peace building process. So our Commandant Chief Senior General Miao has repeatedly made it clear during the past few years that whatever the reform direction, that our armed forces is committed to sticking to the Constitution 2008. In particular, our armed forces leaders are advised to amendment on any of the basic articles of the Constitution that might result in the national armed forces losing their national privileges and their political edge. In support of those objectives, the 6-point policy of the armed forces has been repeated, which are to have a keen desire to reach the eternal peace, to keep promise agreed to in the peace deal, to avoid capitalization on peace agreement, to avoid placing a heavy burden on local people, to strictly abide by the existing law, and to march towards a democratic country in accord with the Constitution 2008. So there are also 3 main national causes in our country. So they are often stated by our armed forces leader and remain stable in the media and official publication, which are non-disintegration of the union, and the non-disintegration of the national solidarity, and the perpetuation of the sovereignty. So these 3 causes are shared duty of every citizen. Thus must be forever safeguarded by the armed forces, and all the national brethren have to perform this duty in the union as well. So moreover, the optimistic news came in the end of the year 2018. Our Commander-in-Chief released an announcement of a temporary ceasefire effective in the conflict zones in the north and northeast of the country, which proved noted of the welcome from the National Reconciliation and Peace Center at the time. The 2 strongest ethnic organizations of FENCC, which are the UWSA, which is War Army, and also KIO, Kachin organization, also issued statement welcoming the armed forces 21st December announcement. In a few words, Cameron's temporary ceasefire was welcomed by the EUs. It is more or less helpful step toward peace and stability, and also it will be still effective until the end of this year. The one important thing is that China's participation in the peace process. The China Special Envoy for the Asian Affairs, Mr. Song Guoxian, played a key role in the progress of the peace negotiating among our government and also a non-signatory ethnic organization. It has been paving a way for the war-led Northern Alliance groups to attend the conference. And also the Chinese government has been assisting the peace process, although China has been accused of backing up the ethnic organization on its borders. Accordingly, it was clear that the big challenges remain in armed conflicts and a political changeover, why the peace conference has been stalled. For the State Administration Council, the SAC formed the Sovereign New Peacemaking Committee on the last year on February 17. The National Solidarity and Peacemaking Central Committee, NSPCC, was formed, comprising 70 people, and the chair led by the Senior General Mayor Lai. This committee member includes Vice Senior General Sowin as a deputy chair and other SAC members. And the NSPCC, the National Solidarity and Peacemaking Working Committee, was also formed, comprising of 33 members. It was chaired by the Vice Senior General Sowin. And also the committee member include the Union Minister, Commander, the Regional Command, and other officials. In turn, and under the NSPWC, the government has also formed a further National Unity and Peace Coordination Committee, which consists of 40 members. It was led by the Lieutenant General Yabi, and the other members include Union Minister and other high-ranking military commander. This committee held discussion with ethnic organization in last year and also in this year. So for the current situation, some ethnic organization trained people defense forces, which was formed after the February 1st, 2021, which I show in this map. This EA's weapon ammunition to the PDS, and also this PDF attack and both the innocent people in the both urban and rural area. The government declared this national unity government, which is the exile government, and this community representative Bidon and also the PDF as and lawful organization, and also the terrorist group. So the government has started the counterterrorism operation, but it is not the offenses against ethnic armed organization, just the counterterrorism operation to these BDS forces. Sorry. To summarize, the government demand armed organization to join the negotiation after laying down arms and sign the nationwide ceasefire agreement has barred some of the country's most powerful ethnic organizations to stay away from the political top. Their rejection to join NCA agreement destabilized the dialogue of perspective. Moreover, the demand for the non-cessation from the Union and the Single Army issue was one reason for the delayed peacekeeping process. So NCA process in Myanmar is not yet affected as it is facing stagnation at the present. And even though the government has a strong way to build the peace. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thanks a lot for your presentation. Dear colleagues, please don't hesitate. Any questions, right? Either in chat, right? Or you could raise your hands, please. Yes, please, we have a question from Honorable Professor Wadi. Professor Wadi, right? Please, right?
I would like to ask question to our friend from Myanmar. If there are third parties, are there third parties involved in the peace process between the government of Myanmar and the rebel groups or any groups opposing the government? And how far is the role of these third parties, if any?
Sorry, do you mean the political party, right?
I mean, what I mean is by third parties, I'm referring to countries that try to mediate, to mediate the conflict between Myanmar and the local groups, local rebel groups. Are there countries involved, and why?
I think currently China is the only third party to negotiation between the government and ethnic organization. And years before, I think that some Western country like the United States and some Australia wanted to join such a negotiation process. But currently, only China is the main negotiator between organization and the government.
Professor, do you think China's involvement as third party helpful in the resolutions of the conflict, or it has some problems also?
So I think the China involvement in our peace making building process is very much important because two strongest ethnic organizations were located on the Sino-Myanmar border. The people living in the border area live in both sides. The ethnic are same, like the white people, and some ethnic people, they both live in both countries. So this ethnic organization also found as these people. So the Chinese involvement in the peace building process is very much important. Sir.
Yeah. What do you think the reactions of the Myanmar government if there are other countries other than China who would like to offer their mediation in the conflict in Myanmar? What do you think would be the reaction of the Myanmar government?
I think if any other country apart from China would like to join in the peace negotiation process, I think the Myanmar government will welcome these third party countries. Like some Western country like European Union or India. Yeah.
What do you think if Russia What do you think
it
if
is.
Russia involves as third party?
Yeah, Russia may be the major power country in Asia Pacific, our Indo-Pacific region. So yeah, we welcome the Russia participation in this peace making process. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Thank you for your answer. Dear Professor Wadi, right? It's our fifth seminar, right? We discussed peace building and peacekeeping in different regions of the world, right? And already, like, it is the fifth region of the world, right? It doesn't mean that Russia is intending to participate, right, in peacekeeping process, right, in all these regions of the world, right? Is our, first of all, like, academic seminar. Before we go to our next speaker, you know, in Africa we have such a formula for peacekeeping, which is called African solutions to African problems. Whether in ASEAN there is a kind of such a formula like ASEAN solutions for ASEAN problems. So yeah, I would like to present the next speaker, Ksenia Yefremova, professor at MGIMO University. Ksenia, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you. Я буду говорить по возможности по-русски.
Allow me to speak in Russian, please. I would ask Nikita Sergeyevich to turn on the presentation, if I may. Yes.
Можно оригинальный звук.
Wait a second, please.
While my presentation is being put up, I would like to clarify that here I speak on my personal behalf, on my personal opinion, as an analyst that by no means could be perceived as a reflection of the official position of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the position that reflects the position of my university. My today's presentation is dedicated to the current political situation in Myanmar and ASEAN efforts on its normalization. We do know that ASEAN has a rich experience of resolving regional conflicts, internal political crisis. We can name here the conflict in Cambodia in the 70s, 80s, and it's also very interesting to take a look at how ASEAN is working in resolving the political crisis in Myanmar. We see that for 25 years, Myanmar has been a member of ASEAN, but there has been no radical change in the situation to peacekeeping successes. As of now, it's not observable, unfortunately, and here we have a question. What exactly has ASEAN been doing regarding Myanmar all these years? And maybe it has been doing something wrong. If we don't see this result so far, can we have the next slide, please? In general, I have tried to analyze this situation and try to outline some stages in interacting of Myanmar with its colleagues from ASEAN. I get 4 stages. Stage 1 is providing Myanmar, if we can call it that, using financial terms, a credit of trust from the ASEAN side. On the other hand, it's using of this loan by Myanmar. Next is stage, if we use financial terms, the so-called accrual on ASEAN trust. And the last 4 stage that's taking place now is the possibility of Myanmar to pay with this for this loan. And here I like to have this 4 stages and to cover them in detail. Let's have the next slide, please. We all know that Myanmar numerously had some offers to join ASEAN even before it was created. There were talks about it, and during the Cold War, we had this offer several times, but Myanmar conducted active independent policy of non-joining any blocs or organizations, and we can say that first stage of its active interaction with ASEAN starts in the year 1990, when Chaitanya Prime Minister first spoke about that countries of the Eastern Indochina and Myanmar would be nice to unite, to turn Indochina from a battlefield into a market. And now, there was an idea of constructive increase in the diplomatic approach of ASEAN that provided for mixture of flexible diplomatic approaches and extended political partnership with Myanmar. And in June 1997, Myanmar joined ASEAN, but for a long time, membership became to a certain degree limited, we can call it that. And let's say European Union has been quite actively doubting and objecting against the participation of Myanmar in the regional forum Russia, Europe, but ASEAN had the principal position and blocked the decision on 10 European Union members unless Cambodia laws and Myanmar participation will be approved. And this package deal, from my point of view, showcased the decisiveness of Myanmar on the first stage to support the position and to stand on it despite the fact that Western partners might not be too happy with it. Let's have the next slide, please. And at the next stage, in Myanmar, there was a series of events that required for an active involvement of ASEAN as an organization that would help Myanmar to solve these problems and by some means to protect it from criticism and various accusations from the Western countries. Right now, I will not list specifically which activities and events took place there to not waste the time of our respected guests and speakers and audience, but I want to say what here deserves attention. The thing is that the policy of constructive engagement held by ASEAN was aimed, first of all, at the fact that Myanmar and its government will make some steps that would be expected from it by ASEAN. So some duties that, as it seems to me, would be imposed by the Association of the South Eastern Nationalities Association before its entry, but as it seems to me, they did not take into account that Myanmar has taken a very principled stance on matters of its national security and interior affairs, and at this stage, ASEAN faced a situation where Myanmar is not ready to make any leeways to the Western countries that impose sanctions on it, and thus ASEAN had to, in a way, using this financial metaphor, to pay for the debts of Myanmar to the global community with this credit of trust that they were able to amass through many years of interaction, collaboration with its Western partners. So, in a sense, ASEAN was oriented at protecting Myanmar from criticism from Western countries. But here, there was a plan that Myanmar will take some steps, and Myanmar did some steps to take it back, but unfortunately it did not help to lift sanctions off of it. And Wu Teng-Sein's government has been quite actively participating, at least tried to collaborate with the United States of America, but unfortunately, the United States of America, I mean, they did not respond to this desire from Myanmar to be a part of the global community. Can we have the next slide, please? And next stage saw the events happen that quite significantly reflected on the relations between Myanmar and ASEAN. The biggest is, of course, the Rohingya crisis of 2016-2017, when Islamists from Rohingya army conducted a series of bloody provocations on the Bangladeshi border, and as a reply to these provocations, Myanmar started a full-scale counter-terrorist operation in Rakhine State. Unfortunately, the stabilization of activities in this region led to the fact that these representatives of Rohingya ethnicity had to leave their houses and flee to neighboring Bangladesh. Accordingly, some part of ASEAN countries supported Myanmar positions, but Muslim countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, ended up in a very difficult and complex situation because they had to, in a way, answer to the outrage of their citizens that think that in Myanmar there were started repressions of their fellow Muslims. What else can be said? That leader of Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi, had to personally had to be sent to the had to personally go to the International Criminal Court in Hague to counter the to counter the activities that were casting shade not only on the Myanmar government but the Myanmar army. There was a very difficult situation that ended up back then, and we need to say that ASEAN tried to still come up with a common position on the crisis, and it was very hard for them to do so, but we need to note the situation that ASEAN countries were deeply concerned with Myanmar's getting closer to China. That happened within the framework of the National League for Democracy. Indeed, there was a project on economic corridor between Myanmar and China signed, and some Asian countries were expressing worries that the conditions for this economic corridor might turn Myanmar into a satellite state of China, which of course is an undesirable turn of events for ASEAN countries. Can we have the next slide, please? And now we have a very interesting stage when after the government changed, the leaders of National League for Democracy were withdrawn from power, and has been an emergency declared in Myanmar according to the constitution that now stand because of this. The authority now is in the Supreme General Minman High. What is interesting to say here, first of all, is that China helped this new government, and a lot of support was provided, despite the fact that China had amazing relationships with the government of the National League for Democracy. It seemed that China had to join the Western sanctions, and China did not do so. So actually, it agreed with the right of the council to rule the country. But we need to say that in the previous presentation, we've already heard this moment that the shadow government that was formed by the MPs of the National League for Democracy, it tried to create some people defense forces that tried to get support at Myanmar's outskirts from the armed groups that did not sign the national ceasefire agreement. Accordingly, ASEAN had to react to this. And here we see the most interesting things for them at the start. ASEAN showed a very harsh position regarding State Administrative Council.
Минаунхлайну, который сейчас фактически исполняет обязанности руководителя страны, АСЕАН отказала ему в праве участия. Предложила, чтобы Мьянма прислала какого-то неполитического представителя. Ну и вполне ожидаемо, конечно, в НЭПИДО отказались от такого сублимированного участия в деятельности АСЕАН. Справедливо указать введение таких мер, которые
that discriminates one of the ASEAN members. It is not accessible and it counteracts and contradicts the ASEAN spirit and charter. So here we have questions why ASEAN, that for so long supported Myanmar and has sincerely tried to integrate in its ranks, why ASEAN showed this weird position. The next slide, please. And it seems to me that this measure of not allowing the head of Myanmar to its summits, and it was a forced measure because Southeast Asian countries have to also think on how the decision will be met by China and the United States of America, especially in the current situation when China-American relationships have been have seen a new degree of some conflict. It seems to me that this process would not be successful. But there are two reasons. First, it seems to me that ASEAN in this situation does not want to put on any responsibility on itself for things happening in Myanmar, the armed conflicts of supporters and enemies of the general. And the second moment is
They have a fear to get into the conflict, and on this background, it's quite clear that ASEAN would take a step aside from this conflict, which have never done before. But this is because of the international situation and the leaders of the ASEAN. This strategy for them, it seems, to take aside from the active regulation of the American and Chinese conflict. This is the best strategy for them, as it seems, for the next years. And I would like to finish my report at this point. Thank you very much for attention. Ready to answer your questions, if any.
Dear colleagues, don't hesitate to ask your questions. Ксения Александровна, я с вашего позволения тогда задам тоже, наверное, вопрос, да, вот по вашей презентации. Ну, спасибо за такой актуальный доклад. Тема действительно острая. Мы развиваем с коллегами, да, проблематику, которая называется новая биполярность. Вот. Коллективный Запад и коллективный не Запад. Вот, в привязке к транзиту власти, да, то есть транзит мировой власти от США к Китаю. Вот. Есть понимание, да, что всегда этот процесс сопровождается напряженностью и так далее. То, что мы наблюдаем на сегодня скажем так, на западном фланге, да, то есть у нас получается какая ситуация, да, Белоруссия – это часть коллективного не Запада, на Украине решается, где пройти.
Ukraine, it's solved where the border will be drawn, where the western border of collective non-West will be drawn, but we understand that Ukrainian conflict is a local, it's a local conflict because the main conflict still happens somewhere in Taiwan in several years. And what do you think? Can it be forecasted and to understand that we have strict block disciplines, the blocks to crystallize? And to speak now about geopolitical pluralism as of today, it's very hard to do so. And in Belarus, for example, in Kazakhstan, and another countries. So in the context of this ever increasing new bipolar design conflict, bipolarity, in the context of maybe some future possible conflicts around Taiwan and others, what do you think, where we will draw the border or the line of the collective West and the collective non-West in the Southeastern Asia and Asian countries? Will they be entirely in one block, or the border will be drawn in this block? I understand that the question is easy, it's not easy, but I'm interested.
Thank you very much for the question. I would say several years ago I was in Myanmar, and with the question of the future of the role of Russia in Southeast Asia, and the colleagues asked a similar question: what should ASEAN do in such a situation when this rivalry between two leading countries is so acute? And I have a feeling that the countries of Southeast Asia, they should at anyhow try into this conflict not to get deep, because what you say, if there would be a destruction between the pro-Western oriented and anti-Western oriented countries, that would mean the end of the ASEAN as it is. That would be a big loss for the region, even for the region of the big Southeast Asia, because ASEAN since the 90s is playing a very significant role as a buffer or damper of this difficult relations between the great countries. And it seems to me that ASEAN is making very properly when tries to get aside from this conflict. But the problem is that if ASEAN would get aside of this conflict fully, then the war would transfer to the territory this rivalry, which has a hot points. This rivalry between this national defense and the parties supported from abroad. This situation, that would be a big tragedy for the whole region, for the whole ASEAN. That's why it seems to me that ASEAN should not now push away Myanmar, but should find the ways of interaction with this country, that's government, the present government, which can help to keep its integrity. Well, your words into the God's ears, as we say in Russia. When we made the analysis in the previous year, and there were two integration groups, European Union and ASEAN, who tried to be aside of the conflict, and we see that European Union tried to be aside, but now what we see is just a block struggle. Not of any country can get aside. They should clearly take one or another side. And we have a question from a colleague, Jonathan Jordan, University of Indonesia. That's a question in the chat. And ASEAN should more actively work more active in case in Myanmar. Yes, I see the question in the chat. Yes, I have an opinion that the idea of not formal meeting of the leaders of ASEAN in order to try not to solve, of course, the problem, but at least to understand what happens now in Myanmar and to make the political assessment and evaluation of this and try to find the ways out of the situation which could help ASEAN as an organization to keep its integrity. This is necessary. It's not only possible, but this is necessary, and to solve the problems of Myanmar without Myanmar, it's also not possible, because Myanmar, this is the biggest country of Indochina Peninsula, the second after Indonesia, and it seems to me that, of course, we must invite the government of Myanmar and to solve this problem together with them. It seems to me the most important for ASEAN is to try not to follow the Western pressure, which happens from the side of United States, European Union, which put the sanctions on Myanmar, which in different versions actively help financially, and even with the armory to the alternative government, which is brought out of Myanmar, and they are not representative of anyone. It seems to me that they don't want, of course, to sit at the table of negotiations and government of Minang Line and this national government of the nation. It seems to me that ASEAN should, of course, that's clear that it seems to me that this should be a principal position, and to make the negotiations with the real government which exists in Myanmar, maybe to support some peacekeeping process inside Myanmar, though this is very difficult to do now. But it seems to me that with this present government, they should decide and make negotiations, and I feel that I have answered the question. Thank you very much for report, for the answers. Dear colleagues, if there are any questions, you can raise your hand to write in the chat. Thank you very much, Ksenia. And we move forward. We have one more report on Myanmar, and as I understand, it would be somewhere between with our Burma report. Ivan Dubrovsky, Russian University of Friendship. Good day, dear colleagues. I hope that you can see presentation, and yes, can you make it a full screen demonstration? Don't I have? Okay, let me refresh, and we start. Great. Can we switch the slides? First of all, I would like to thank for the opportunity to be at the conference. That's a great honor for me, and my report is in echoing with the topic of the process of peace building in Myanmar, but this is more focused on the role of actors in this process. So once again, if we describe the situation, I would highlight that the process of peace building in Myanmar is closely connected to the ethnic, armored, and military organizations connected. These organizations are based in separate states, as we can see on the map. On the periphery of the state border, where the 30% of the population live, quite in a big density, not Burman population, not ethnic majority, and in these states there is a system of self-governing, quite a fruitful one, and it's working for a period of independence, acquisition of Myanmar, though there is a particular contradiction between the state, between the party of the government and the party of organization. First of all, the interests are different on the diversification of the subnational level and national level. On the national level, if we talk, the government tries to have a stable and provision of plenipotentiary on the territory of the whole country, operating the principle of the sovereignty and territorial integrity. This organization tries to federative self-autonomy when they can rule the territories up to their own federal army, where the organizations and the groups could be as the divisions, but self-governmental. And there is also a question of the citizenship. The representative of these organizations of the legislative government, national government level, and organizations, military organizations on the taking decisions on the national level. More simple questions, questions of control of territory, control on the population which lives on this territory and carrying out the government, and extraction and processing of resources, mineral resources. If we talk about the national reconciliation process in peace building, then we can express 4 stages, every of which has secluded circle from conflict to the peace initiatives. They could have a long-term, short-term process, and they could initiate in not formal way, but later they could have more fundamental for specialized forms. These initiatives led to particular contradictions, not always between the government and the state, but also between themselves, and that also led to the new stage of conflict with a loss of trust and worsening of the aspects. And as we can see, the conference of 48 and the coup d'etat in 1962, there were initiatives of the government, but they ceased because of different situations. But starting with 1988, especially, that reinforced in 2011, the government tried to sign the agreement about the cease of fire. It's like the peace building strategy in order to normalize the government and to implement particular or to move into formal relations with the organization. That was done with different tools, and one of such tools that was a reprofiling of this organization into the border squad, which could make a function of protection on the same territory where they are located and they're on the periphery of the continental boundaries, and this squad could implement and these national values and to satisfy the necessity of safety of the citizens and the whole state. This tool seemed to be effective for reprofiling of the national union, which was Buddhist Army Separate, the 5th Division, which later diminished the amount of this organization, and that led to the second tool, which is effectively used, is the establishment of the regime of ceasefire. As you can see in this ceasefire is quite mosaic. It is based on bilateral agreements. These are agreements which were signed after the government of Deng Xiaoping in 2011. Before this, there were agreements of 1968, 1980s, but part of these agreements were re-signed or they were violated before. That's why it was needed to clarify this juridical status of the relations of these two actors. In 2015, that was a signed national agreement of cease of the fire, and as you can see, that was signed only with 8 organizations. Later, to also join this, the party of the state Nuamon and Lahu Union, a democratic union. Also, there were established additional anti-crisis teams and councils, coordination teams. One of these organizations, but as you can see out of this table of the council organizations, not all of them were actually arranged to sign the final agreement about the seizure of fire, and all the represented organizations, they are different in the numbers, and this is also reflecting their activity. And finally, the third tool is the institutionalization after the ceasefire, and this is the achievement of the Union Agreement. This new Boulogne Conference, which could be the public agreement about the new status in this state. So as you can see, there is the leading team of the peacekeeping, peacebuilding process out of 10 members who signed the national agreement of the ceasefire. The benefit of this group is that it participates in the development of the Union Agreement, and 3 rounds of this agreement were successfully held in the relations between the government, between the center, and these organizations. But nevertheless, there is a parallel union, which the benefit of which is that it is focusing on 70% of the personal part of the armored groups represented and existing on territory of Myanmar. But the problem of this one is that it is fragmented, and there is so-called Northern Alliance, which is represented by the 4 organizations, and the organization of the Kachin Freedom, Kachin Independence Organization in this alliance, and it is much spoken about the union of 3 brotherhoods. The first 3 organizations which participate altogether in one front line. But also we have 3 other organizations, and they're not ready and the political regime. And once again, if we come back and put an accent on the modern situation in the organizations, in the national reconciliation on territory of Myanmar, we should pay attention to the following point. I have expressed in a color the organizations which belong to each of the blocks. If we take a look on the peacekeeping leading team, we see the block discipline, the best out of others, because all of them supported the government in the asylum. The government which is abroad and which keeps in the contact and asked for make the coalition with the national defense, which is on the territory of Myanmar. But the most active was Karen National Union, which participated in more than 100 war episodes against the National Army of Myanmar. If we talk about the political part, then all all of them were against the coup d'etat in 1991, but at the same time, not all of them were agreed to support the national government, and most of them keep their own goals. This is also about the activity of Arakan army, which does move further the territory in Rakhine, and they do not agree to their colleagues on the Northern Alliance and the Union of Three Brothers to activate the war activity. And three main other participants of the Federal Committee on the negotiations and consultation, they are quite passive. And they also take the neutral position, but they have quite significant amount of the soldiers and good preparation. And summing up to all mentioned above, we should highlight that out of all the strategies which are used by the government to establish the process of peace building and the process of peace building promotion, this is use of the hybrid regime in the establishment of the coalition with the separate organizations, and also there is a decentralization of the government, what takes down the concern of separate organizations in the pressure on the autonomy. And it is also used the excess of the separate ethnies and folks who want to get independence, and the necessity for the right of vote in the participation of the political life. And on the subnational level, there is achieved the process of the reconciliation through the establishment of general control of the territory through the support of such agreements as establishment of autonomous territorial organizations, which are supported by the Constitution, 6 autonomous territorial areas and entities were announced as autonomous with a full access to administrative resources independently and participation in an economic study and cover of these regions. And the most successful, which fixed the process of peace building in Myanmar, is a joint usage of resources in this region. Of course, the infrastructural initiatives they are promoted with the participation of the government and the investments of the Chinese People Republic also attracted, which is China is interested in entering into these territories and the ocean, but the general understatement of attraction of the meetings of international organizations and successful usage of existing resources, this provides the process of the peace building in Myanmar. That's all from my side. Thank you very much for attention. Thank you, Ivan, for this report. Dear colleagues, any questions to Ivan in a chat, or maybe you can raise your hands. Tatiana Ponka, Russian University of Friendship. Yes, your question, please. Dear Ivan, many thanks for very interesting report. With a great interest, I listened to this report, and you answered most of my questions, which I had in the process of listening to your report. But I have one more question for the government, which is in the unity of the country. This is the present government for this, in the previous government. But for the government of the most danger, which ethnic unity is the main danger, from the side of which, from Shan and from whom, from which population, the danger is higher, because there was already the peacekeeping process with the rebels, but now they active back. Thank you very much for this interesting question. If we come back to the quantitative parameters, which are in the center of monitoring, and the most active organization is Army of Independence of Kachin and Army of Alliance of which are represented in the northern part of Shang. These organizations became active after February 2021, and together with Arakan Army, they activated, independent of the National Reconciliation and Unity Aung San Suu Kyi government, they just activated in order to use the political crisis in Myanmar, which had to struggle, the armed forces which had to struggle against the forces supported by the government of unity, supported from abroad, and they tried to get the part of the territories which were lost because of the previous activities, and coming up to these borders, coming up to the national boundaries, which they suppose to be their natural. They ceased the fire. Now they keep a defense on this territory. What is maybe a way for the existing government to for the future negotiation process, for the definition of these not governmental unities. And also some of the organizations, for example Arakan Army, they even went such initiatives such Arakan Dream, which guarantees the transfer of territorial vision of the integrity on some new stages and establishment of this quasi-state organization with the citizenship project in this area, what of course needs from the government and reinforcement of diplomatic and economic pressure in order to seize this separatist movement and to leave them on the way of the federal and provision of the ethnic rights and freedom which they follow since the moment of the existence and foundation. That's how I would like to answer your question. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ivan, for this report. Dear colleagues, are there any questions on this report, or in the chat, or maybe you raise your hands? I don't see any question. Thank you very much, Ivan. Let's move forward in the final report in this part, and let me switch to English and we translate.
Right. Once again, and the last but not the least, right, report will be once again on Philippines, right? And I would like to present our next speaker, Gabriel Honrada, right? He is from Philippines, right? But then he is assistant at our university, right? So he's a kind of Russo-Philippine, right? Gabriel, right? I don't know, right? What is your identity, right? How you feel it, right? More like affiliated with Ruden University or like Filipinian, right? So welcome. The floor is yours. Yeah.
Good day, everybody. I would like to share my presentation now regarding the communist insurgency in the Philippines. So I would like to confirm if the presentation is visible to everybody.
Yes, it is visible, right? Could you launch the, yes.
Okay, so good day, everybody. My presentation would present my humble insights about this long-running security concern in our country, the communist insurgency. So I would touch on historical, pragmatic, ideological, and military barriers to a lasting peace. So for a brief outline, we can see it all. I will start with a background and end with a short timetable of current peacekeeping efforts or what has happened in the process. So to give you a background, just for those who are unfamiliar, the Communist Party of the Philippines, or New People's Army and National Democratic Front, aims to overthrow the present Philippine government and establish a communist state. And it's primarily Maoist in orientation, and it was founded in 1969. And arguably, it is Southeast Asia's, or probably the world's longest running communist insurgency, even longer than those left-wing insurgencies happening in South America with FARC, or even in India with the Naxalites. So this one is probably the longest one since 1969. So main idea of my presentation is that, well, the Philippine government views the communist insurgency as a long-term threat that must be destroyed. My, I would say, cynical view is that the communist insurgency itself has evolved into an anomaly, into an essential ingredient to maintain the political status quo. And it has already become an essential power ingredient in Philippine power politics. And to simply to further elaborate it, I will discuss later, the communist movement has become a scapegoat for Philippine government to cover up its failures, keep the military out of politics and foreign policy, and to stifle the emergence of, I would say, other viable or intellectually fertile movements for social change in the country. And tragically, it's my view that they have become a tool to perpetuate the status quo and the elite rule that they so rapidly aim to destroy in the first place. So let's move on to what I would believe the historical factors, and let's move, and I would emphasize the historical institutionalism of the Philippine military. I think the institutional character of our military is also a reason to why this long-running threat has not been neutralized or has not been managed properly. If we view Philippine military history, our military history, Philippine military traces its roots to colonial militia, whose role was not to defend the country. Primarily, the external defense of the country was left to Spain, but it was an instrument to crush grassroots rebellions against colonial rule. And the setup or the dynamic in colonial times was that soldiers or officers remained dependent on elite privileges on favors and privileges from the elite. And to do so, they had to crush grassroots rebellions throughout our history. I believe Professor Vadi somewhat touched on this when he mentioned about colonialism. That is the heritage of our military in colonial times. Now, when we move to the Cold War, the strange thing is that after World War II, a lot of our political elites collaborated with the Japanese. However, what is strange is that instead of holding our version of Nuremberg trials to hold these collaborators accountable, instead they sought to serve to secure their position by focusing on what I would say again grassroots communist rebellions against post-colonial injustices such as failed land reform, lack of grievance mechanisms, and poor labor conditions, so on and so forth. Come the martial law years, the communist insurgency was securitized by, I would say, a paranoid regime, the Marcos regime in the 1980s, and blown beyond realistic proportions. And in doing so, it gave the military an excuse to taste unchecked power and expand its privileges and elite connections. So that would be the historical factors in this slide. So moving on to more contemporary times, the pragmatic factors. I would say that the still ongoing COVID-19 pandemic was a catalyst for the need of government scapegoat. And if you follow Philippine news, and until now, the government still resorts to this what it calls red tagging response, branding opposition characters and characters and activists, regardless of their political affiliation, as communist sympathizers in a manner similar to McCarthyism in the 1950s. And also, as the weakness of the regime, the current administration was exposed, one way is to drive a wedge between Philippine society and the military, because if you look at our history, we had two popular revolutions, EDSA 1 and EDSA 2, wherein key factor was the collaboration between civilian and military sectors for potent political change. However, this requires big trust between civilian and military institutions. However, in connection with its red tagging, this sort of McCarthyism or witch hunt, branding activists as communist sympathizers, even if they're not, it drives a wedge, and it creates an atmosphere of mistrust in order to prevent the formation of this civil-military nexus. That is, I would say, the most potent tool for political change in the country. And another pragmatic factor that I would say is to institutionalize the incumbent administration's hold on power. Next month, we will be holding our elections, and it would be a strategic reset for the country. Although I believe the current administration has prepared for this. Just recently, they established this National Task Force to End Communist Armed Insurgency, NTF-LCAC. However, this notion or this institution has been criticized for being redundant and aimless. And there are already a number of peacekeeping initiatives that exist. So why establish another yet institution? The point of this is to, I believe, is to establish a legitimate hold on power, the outgoing administration to establish a legitimate hold on power within the legitimate state bureaucracy. This aimless NTF-LCAC, it doesn't have any clear mission or mandate. However, it can serve as a power base for the outgoing administration to maintain somehow a connection to the legitimate state bureaucracy. And also, it is a way to keep its influence within the military, even if it's outgoing, because if the next administration or the opposition would win, and it was highly critical of this institution, it cannot so easily disband or defund this National Task Force to End Communist Rebellion, because it will not sound good with the military. And opposition figures in the country had been so trying hard to court the military to their side. So, okay, moving on to pragmatic factors. Keep the military apolitical. So, in some studies read recently, the Philippine foreign policy towards China would be termed as accommodation. Accommodation meaning something more than slavish bowing down. There will be some resistance, but of course, we will always give way to them. We'll always give way to them in practice. However, this subservient foreign policy may rankle the ire of certain ranks in the military, especially since most of the military and Philippine political elite are affiliated with the United States in terms of their funding, in terms of their training, education, business connections. They're all with the United States. And it's not, and this is one perspective to view the Philippines' loyalty to the United States. It's not because of any objective analysis of our foreign policy, but because of elite connections to the United States. So by declaring the CPP-NPA, the communist movement, as top national threat so many times during the pandemic and up to now, the Duterte administration keeps the Philippine military occupied while being rather subservient to Chinese interests. It keeps military sentiment down and at bay. And also by by placing this internal security threat, CPP-NPA, as a top national security concern, it keeps the Philippine military geared towards its institutional design, which is for internal security, and keeps the military funded for such a purpose. And indirectly, it also buys loyalty to the regime. The communist many publications of this Communist Party criticize the Philippine military as a mercenary military. It's not really for the people, but it's aims to preserve a system, a state, a neo-colonial state, rather than being an authentic people's army preserving people's rights. So we go now to ideological factors. What ideological factors? So
Probably,
in terms,
Gabriel, probably like 4 minutes like this, right?
Understood, sir. So ideological factors. Uh, the communist movement is split. It has split in ideological debates between reaffirmists and rejectionists. Reaffirmists want to hold the traditional Maoist line of insurgency, while rejectionists want a more contemporary approach. However, I would say that these ideological approaches stifle the evolution of the movement and keep it in intellectual stasis. It cannot evolve to challenge or it cannot evolve to respond to its goals and aims. And because it remains intellectually stagnant, it also attracts members who can be, it also attracts potential thinkers, the best of the Philippine human capital in this stagnant debate. And in turn, it stifles the emergence of possibly fertile and alternative movements for social change in the country. It causes them to be mired in, I would say, pointless ideological debates. And also we have the military factor. While the Philippine military is, of course, has firepower and numbers and superiority, the NPA is far from defeated. And possible reason for this is that I think there is a dynamic that the NPA must be kept strong and alive enough to remain as a threat in order to feed us the securitization narrative. However, it must not become strong enough to challenge the existing political order, the neo-colonial political order that was left in the Philippines after Spanish and American rule. So some key takeaways. So to summarize all that I have said, CPP-NPA, it has become an anomaly to unwitting asset of the system. So Philippine government needs a scapegoat, means to keep the military relevant and away from politics and the foreign policy, institutionalize the transient regime, and stifle alternative movement for social change. And yes, CPP-NPA keeps a protracted conflict by winning by not losing. And the serious question for peacekeeping efforts, how do you initiate and maintain peacekeeping efforts of both sides, Philippine government and CPP-NPA, if both sides have a stake in the status quo, in the continued fighting? So a brief timeline, we can see from 1987 to 2020. As of now, peace talks are yet suspended. So 2021 and beyond. And that will be the end of my presentation, my humble presentation. Thank you very much, and I am ready to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. Dear colleagues, don't hesitate to ask your questions. You could raise your hand, or you could print in chat. Yes, Honorable Professor Wadi, welcome. The floor is yours. Yeah.
Hello, Professor Wadi.
Yeah.
Good day.
Yeah, I'd like. Yeah, good day, Gabriel. I'd like to congratulate you for your presentation. First, I like your concept of anomaly. I think that summarizes the whole subject you presented. And the implication is that somehow the CPP leadership, has benefited from the status quo, just as the national government leadership, including the military, has also benefited from the status quo, so that both protagonists, even if they are in conflict in theory and in practice, are actually beneficiaries of the rather contradictions and anomalies that the struggle has posed. The question, Gabriel, how popular do you think this perspective of anomalies wherein protagonists are supposedly enemies, but they are beneficiaries of the status quo, including the struggle itself? In other words, I think you are not simply posing a critical perspective, but a rather cynical perspective. But it summarizes the absurdity of the subject of this thing. So what do you think? How popular or unpopular this concept of anomalies amongst protagonists, in
Well,
your view?
I can cite my talks with my colleagues who are still in the military. The military knows this, that it has become the anomaly has become part of the system. It's like saying that the cancer has become a critical organ for the system to function. So, so in that sense, they think that this will go on, and they are quiet about it. It's an open secret. And it is likened to, however, this anomaly is likened to, I would say, how the Israelis look at the Palestinians trimming the grass. The Israelis would say, well, yes, the NPA is the grass and it is an essential part of the lawn, but of course you have to somehow trim it to prevent it going out of control. You cannot fully eradicate it as I have mentioned. It has already become a part of keeping the status quo, of keeping the homeostasis of the regime or the Philippines neo-colonial system from functioning. However, you cannot really eradicate it because it already plays a role in, for example, building state legitimacy. It's part of state narratives from the National Security Council and, of course, for the Philippine regime from time to time. It also, I would say, yes, Professor?
Can I have a follow-up question?
Yes, Professor.
Gabriel, one of the beneficiaries, as you mentioned, of this absurdity, if you may, is the military-industrial complex. And I'm not only referring to a single country. It can be a group of countries who are mostly big powers, but yet are the one exporters or exporting arms and ammunitions to armed groups, whether communists or otherwise. And somehow the situation has worsened because the national and the local players do not realize that they are actually become victims, of the military industrial complex, because they are at the receiving ends. They have to buy firearms, and ironically, to kill fellow Filipinos, or say fellow Africans, or whatever are their nationalities in many parts of the Arabs, for instance, against Arabs, and so on and so forth. So I think the debate or the discourse has to be enlarged on the role of larger beneficiaries in trying to perpetuate conflict as they profit, from these so-called anomalies, making therefore the protagonists, say the CPP, NPA, and the Philippine government and its military, as actually victims. What do you think of this,
Professor?
Gabriel?
The thing is, there is a system that reinforces the elite dependence or patronage politics of the Philippine military. It's written in Philippine Constitution, the military cannot own any military businesses. Unlike, for example, Vietnam, Thailand, or even Myanmar, Philippine military cannot operate military businesses. That's why this kind of system, this protracted conflict, further strengthens the dependency of the Philippine military to elite privileges, to elite funding, in order to, say, maintain their privileged status in society. There is a concept called military corporate grievances, wherein military is viewed as a powerful organization that is sensitive to its own interests as a social class, and it is sensitive to threats to its own reputation, and it can maneuver to defend itself if necessary, its role in society. So I would say the lack of Philippine defense industry, coupled with this post-colonial dynamic of patronage politics, strengthens the necessity for an ongoing protracted conflict, in which in case CPP and the communist rebellion. And I would say also that, Professor, your expertise in Bangsamoro region somehow ties into this, although it's a different flavor, I would say. There is an ethnic and nationalist element to your research, while as for me, it's more of geared towards a social movement. I would say it's similar, but complete different flavor. There are parallelisms, but different directions, I should say.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriel,
Thank you very much
for the nice presentation. Thank you.
Professor Wadi and Gabriel. I would not ask a question about conflict bipolarity, right? Because to my mind, like the major, I would say, the major cause of instability will be in the future this power transit, right, from US to China, right? And it's like a macro historic process, right? But we won't discuss it anymore because we don't have enough time. We still have some person who are declared in general discussion. The first one is Dr. Zar Ni Ma, right? Zar Ni, could you hear us? Could you give a short remark just for 2 or 3 minutes, right? Welcome, please. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, auspicious to you all, greeting from Myanmar. Thank you very much for all of your interesting presentation and research document. You all make a good point and a strong view. I heartily appreciate to you all. I would like to add 2 points concerning peacekeeping process of Myanmar. Myanmar peacekeeping model is a little different from other countries. You know, Myanmar is closely and strategically situated near in China and India. So, external factor is Myanmar is the playground of China and US. That is my point of view, what I observe. Secondly, is the internet affair. You know, Myanmar neighbors are Thailand, Laos, Bangladesh, including China and India. Along the borders from north to south, east to west, there are lots of insurgencies and various kinds of ethnic groups. These groups, since 1948, we are trying to make ceasefire, peacemaking, peacekeeping and peacekeeping. We could not get the end of peacekeeping. Why? Because ethnic armed groups they are demanding their profit. They have profit. That is self-profit. Government is dealing for public interest, public profit. So they can meet each other's. In my point of view, theoretically or practically, they only focus on peace process. I would like to focus on peace including human resource development, because instability of the ceasefire, peacemaking and peacekeeping, the conflicts in conflict area, there are lots of lack human resources. So they have weakened less development, less investments, and very poor growth tend to poverty. So we can't negotiate, we can cooperate. That is my point of view to add in peace building process of.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for your remark, right? I guess we stop here, right? The first session, right? And I give the floor to the moderator of the next session, right? Nikit Sergeyevich, right? The floor is yours, right? I'm sorry, right? I just in time, right? So probably if you need some time for the break, right? Please, yeah.
Okay, one question now. Should we organize a discussion after the first session, or we will continue by the second one?
I guess we discussed already a lot, right? I would probably like to say thanks a lot to everybody who took part, right? To both to present us, to discuss us, to those people who answered questions or asked questions, right? And so thank you once again, right? I think it was rather fruitful discussion, right? We understood what are the major problems, etc. So thank you and have a nice day.
Итак, спасибо большое. Я перейду на русский язык.
Big thanks to you. Allow me to switch to English.
Так, секунду. Небольшой технический момент. Да, прошу Анну Геворгян, нашу коллегу, да, остановить запись оригинальную.